How's everybody doing tonight? Let me check a few things. Been a while. Hope everybody's having a great Tuesday. So again, I'm getting my thing set up. It's been a while since I went live, so just checking on my setup. Um, Give me a one in the chat if you can hear me. Give me a one in the chat. Just left the Black Brain Trust, so getting a little late start, but making it happen. Late night with PBO. So let's see. You see it talking about the GRC. About to get started. Like I said, it's been a minute. Give me a one in the chat if you can hear me. Like I said, I just left the Black Brain Trust. I always like chopping it up with those guys. So see rolling. Once again, give me a one in the chat if you can hear me. I think I'm good. Let me look at the health. Sounds excellent health. So let's see. Got my new PowerPoint set up, so it's struggle streaming a little bit. About to get started. Once again, give me one in the chat if you can hear me. Let's see. Appreciate you, Solo Dolo. Appreciate you, Casual Economist, for joining me. Yeah, I took a little time out in 2023. Casuals, we're gonna just talk a little GRC. We know how we do it. If you got anything about tech or cybersecurity, drop it in the box. And about to get the slideshow rolling. Like you said, it's been a minute. I just took a little breather before I get it rolling again. So let me figure out where. I got this new setup, so I'm working it out. So I think we're rolling. So let's go and get at it. So you see it, governance, risk, and compliance. So what is governance, risk, and compliance? Governance, risk, and compliance is a program or sometimes looked upon as bureaucracy getting in the way of exciting cybersecurity work. But a good GRC program established the foundation for meeting security and compliance objectives. It's the proactive approach to cybersecurity, if done well, minimizing reactive incidents, right? So part of cybersecurity is what? Hardening, compliance, locking down boxes, locking down databases, right? But GRC sits on top of that. We're going to get in there. Are you a government agency? Are you the IRS? Are you NIST? Are you FERPA? Are you education? Right? What part of cybersecurity are you in? What's up, Chaos Rain? Glad you can join us. So, what part of cybersecurity are you in as far as GRC? Right. Once again, GRC sits on top of cybersecurity, compliance, risk. Right. Each one of those are actually separate divisions. So you need governance on top of that for cybersecurity, especially when you're talking about large companies. Once again, are you doing IRS, DOD? HIPAA is the big one, right? You got to have certain compliance to make sure you're following HIPAA compliance from a cybersecurity perspective, right? And part of that is it's governance, and we're going to hit on each individual one, right? What is governance? What is risk? What is compliance, right? A lot of people don't really understand that. Once again, right? That's kind of the top of the pyramid. And once your company gets big enough, that's when you really need governance. If you're small, you're patching, you're doing vulnerability scans, right? But there's no program, right? Cybersecurity program to make that happen, right? So that's where governance, risk, and compliance comes in. So once again, we're going to hit on each one of those and just talk about it from 30,000 foot level. And of course, I'm an AWS guy. We're going to talk about when you go to cloud, how does GRC help you when you do AWS? What does that mean when you're doing governance in the cloud? Right. So once again, you see it at the top, governance, risk, and compliance. So the governance part, we got statutory and regulatory requirements. We got standards. ISO is huge in this. Policies and procedures, organization, information, and tech. Everybody knows we got policies and procedures. Policies are a statement from management of what they want you to do as part of their organization, right? We want to secure the hospital's information, right? So this policy says we're going to secure it. It's coming from management, what level, HIPAA, right? So management has bought in. Then the part of that, right, is the process and procedure. So, okay, you securing it. What is the procedure? I got a database. It's encrypted. I got hash password. The procedure is how do you implement what the policy says, right? And you see right there, PCI, customers contract, B2B. So part of governance too is any vendor coming in, any contracts you sign, even contracts when you sign with AWS and Azure. What does that look like from your company perspective, right? Then the physical controls here, right? What are you locking down? Administrative, physical, and technical controls, password, procedures, Active Directory, Linux, PAM, right? What controls are you putting on those boxes to what? Comply with your policies, right? So what physical controls it says, how are you going to safeguard HIPAA information, right? That's from a governance standpoint. I'm dealing with one monitor, so I'm flipping back and forth. Shout out to Spy in the program. I'm glad you can join us. Then you can see there in the middle, right? Once again, GRC, what is risk, right? Tier one, organization, business lines, and assets. So that's the NIST continuous compliance improvement in the middle, right? You're going to categorize your system. Once again, is that HIPAA, FERPA, NIST, right? So what is the category you're securing your system? You can just say, I'm doing best of breed, right? But you got to categorize. Then you select the controls you're going to use. Even though you're saying I'm doing HIPAA, what HIPAA controls are you using? Right? If it's a Windows box, you're not going to use Linux controls, right? So you got to select it. Then you got to implement those controls. So if you're Active Directory and OUs, right, organizational units for a Windows box, right, then you got to assess those controls to make sure you did them right. Sometimes you do them, then when you test them or scan for them next to scans, you didn't implement them right. So you got to assess them. Then when you're in government, big systems, right, you can have a third party come and say, authorize and say, your system's set up. A lot of times they want a third party assessor to come out and assess what you did. Right. Then continuous monitoring is you do it again to add more controls, better controls. Maybe your whole infrastructure changed, right? So that is the system authorization funnel from this. Then compliance, right? What is compliance? Threat landscape, implement controls, behavior, self-assess. So self-assessment means you just go out and take those NIST controls and validate that you did them yourself. And like we said, what is your external audits, regulatory audits, standard audits? I used to do a lot of IRS work. So Booz Allen would come out every 3 years and do a third-party assessment to see how well you did, right? Then part of that too is they're going to authorize your system to work, right? So then off of that, reporting, internal regulatory bodies and customers. So what does customers mean is I work with a lot of vendors that sell their software to customers. So the customers, and we're going to look at the AWS report artifact. Those reports coming from your assessor that says you're SOC 2 compliant, you're HIPAA compliant, you're NIST compliant, right? Or you FedRAMP. That's the big one, right? So your system is set up to do government work. But once again, that's GRC. You see over here, once again, governance. You got regulatory requirements, standard policy, contracts, and procedures. In the middle is risk, right? So you're validating your systems. So if you implement your controls and all of them fail, right, your system is super risky, right? So when you put your controls on, sometimes you put a control on as a developer or as an infrastructure guy, you could break something, right? So if you couldn't put that control on, and your system is what more at risk because there were certain controls from a cybersecurity perspective you couldn't put on your system, right? Then once again, compliance. You going through and validating these controls, doing self-assessment on those controls, having external auditors come and do those controls and reporting. And when you have external auditors, once again, I did a lot of IRS work, and Booz Allen used to come in. They used to come in about 15 dudes deep, and they're running scans, looking at your policy procedures, giving you a grade, saying how your system is, and if it didn't pass, you wouldn't get they call it an ATO, authority to operate. So that means you couldn't do tax work, or you couldn't take health information into that system if you don't get it authorized, right? So that's one reason GRC is super important, right? Because if you don't get that authority to operate a system, you might lose out on business, right? If you're selling a product to the government, CCRI facts. So if you don't get your system authorized, you might not be able to, once again, take IRS data, take HIPAA data, take educational data. Then you wouldn't be able to do whatever you needed to do to make money, right? So once again, that's why one reason GRC is super important. Once again, if you got any questions, throw them in the box. So I know that small governance, we just gonna hit the high points. Identify, and we just saw them on that sheet. Compliance requirements. You can use frameworks, HIPAA or PCI's credit cards. Identify chosen standards. Once again, NIST, ISO. Shout out to the Black Brain Trust. They were talking about COVID while we were over there. CIS is a basic business hardening. And then once again, conduct program assessment. All right, so those are on there. Determine desired end capability, right? This is under governance, right? We drilling down a little deeper in there. Build a center of excellence. Draft and publish cloud security strategies, DevSecOps management, define and assign functional roles, update policies and procedures, update and integrate cloud services, establish technical governance standards to be used to select controls. What's up, George G? You just got to pick out what you want to do. Why was it too much for you, man? I'm actually thinking about doing a GRC class. Shout out to Simply Cyber. Gerald, he is a PhD. He did a beginning one, so I might do something on top of his. But GRC is the hidden gem. Elaborate why you thought that was too much, George. But once again, it's the governance section. You see it. We just drilling down on what we were looking at. NIST, ISO, COVID, CIS. I'm a IRS Pub 1075, PCI credit cards, right? So that's the governance piece. I used to work with a compliance director. I'm going to interview her. I did the grunt for her, work for her, right? She did the policies and procedures. She handled the on-site auditing, in-house auditing, right? She did all the paperwork. But if the DBAs were doing something wrong or the programmers wasn't doing something right, I would send out and get her that technical security and bring her back the information, because a compliance director sometimes is just managing that paperwork. Because when you do a big audit, man, it was about 3,000 pages of just information. Okay, brother Michael, shout out to him. Yep, I signed up for Simply Cybermaster. Oh, he's the truth. And I think I might do something on top of his, but his course is definitely a basic course. I think it can get you in the door for cybersecurity. Much respect for him. He has a morning briefing where he talks about the hot hacks, virus protection, what's happening. So he goes over the CISO Online series every morning. It's either 8, I think 4 days, and I think Tuesdays at 10. Shout out to him. I've been on this platform a couple times. People, if you facts, I appreciate that. So, because I think he talks about it from the basics, but I was actually going to do a big project that you could put on your resume, right? So when you talk about governance, I was going to set up something like an IRS audit where we would do. He talks about policies and procedures. We would actually write those, then come through and do an assessment of those, do a policy, do a procedure, do guidelines, right? And we'll talk about it. GRC for me is set up as to management section, which is policy procedures. We're going to look on that incident response, configuration management. Then it's the technical part about that. How do you harden? How do you do application security? How do you do purple team, right? Because you got blue, purple, and red team. So which one of those are you going to specialize in to get your bag in, right? It's once again, cybersecurity is big and GRC is big. One job I came in, the title was network engineering. They had me doing CCRIs. Vulnerability skill had me trying to get the RMF, doing manual state review. Oh, shout out! I'm a big STIG guy, man. I worked at DoD for 11 years. So me and shout out to Struggle Security. He doesn't like STIGs. Shout out to I'm usually helping Network Bruh on his channel. I usually give him the STIG of the day. So I'm a big STIG guy. So yeah, that's a big lift. Vulnerability scan. Then you're going to put the manual STIG on it from a networking standpoint. That's a senior engineer, man. You should have been getting paid for that, George. My network guys hate me because shout out, I'll be giving them STIGs for those Cisco routers, man. So that's I call that's big boy security. When you talk about RMS, the risk management framework, and you're gonna mitigate those with compensating controls with the manual STIGs too. Yeah, man, I can understand why you were frowning, man. Once again, I've done STIGs for 10 years. I used to work at DoD as a programmer, as a web admin, and an application admin. My job was actually to put the STIGs on the application, which was 350 checks. I was doing actually Apache for the web server and Tomcat, and our application was Java. Shout out brothers in life. So George, I'm about that life, man. I understand what you. Oh no, man, they was cheating you. Man. I don't know about that. Oh no, man, the guys we paid. Just Google, go on Indeed, put in Cisco and put in STIG. Them guys be making easily 6 figures. I promise you, because I work with those guys and I know their clans. And I work with consultants with easily their bill rate was $200 an hour. Coming from Cisco, because they be charging, they consultant rates be nasty at Cisco. But once again, that's the governance. Like I said, I'm working with one screen, so I'm hopping back and forth. So now this is the risk management standpoint. So like risk management, we saw from the chart we looked at earlier, and I do a lot of this too. We're going to conduct a risk assessment. It could be market, financial, reputational, legal. When you get at a part of GRC, which I never thought, I'm always talking to lawyers. So I'm going to bring a lawyer on that does GRC compliance. He helps us with IRS. Sometimes there's legal gray areas. So I always check with your attorney. Use pre-established threat models for risk assessment. Implementing plans to mitigate, avoid, transfer. And that's kind of what George was talking about when you do those CCRs and you start hardening, right? You're mitigating those risks. Some those you can put on, and some you might have to find a different way to do it, right? I'm a NIST guy, and that's what George was talking about. There's the RMF. Use the NIST risk management framework or other process to process, to authoritize and track the system. I'm definitely NIST 853. I've been doing that for 15 years, so that's kind of my specialty. How I get my bag, to be honest. Like you said, incorporate risk information. Usually you have a risk register, right? So if certain hardening you can't do, that's a risk. Then what can we do to mitigate that, right? So That's the risk part. Yo, George, but if you done that for a year, man, you should have been able to go work for a big consulting company, especially on what's the average salary for GRC? Uh, I would say 80, and I'm just guessing. The reason why I say 80, big brother in life, is most of the time when you're in GRC, Gerald's kind of helping people jump in there, but everybody on the GRC I work for, the CISO was the youngest guy at 45. I was the second youngest at 50. So all our guys in GRC was old. So all those guys had, Brother in Life had at least seriously 20 years in the game, right? The CISO probably had 8, and he came from the NSA. So that's why usually your salary's a little entry level though. Like my man said, he's taking Simply Cyber. Shout out to Gerald. He's a PhD. He has a program. So when you come in, he's helping novice people come in with very little experience. Because a lot of times when you start off with GRC, right, you're actually doing assessments, right? So you're reading and you just jotting down what the DBA says, you jotting down what programmer says, right? So that's the entry level. So that probably would be 30, 40, 50-ish probably. Like I said, from Gerald's program, because you're fresh, but usually when you're in GRC, especially big companies, all those dudes be old, man. So that's why the salaries are a lot higher. Once again, we're talking about risk. Shout out to my man George. He was doing a NIST risk management framework. I'm lucky because risk usually they have the risk and the impact, right? If you got a high risk but the impact's small, right? Or you don't want a high risk and high impact, right? Facts, Rick James, facts. So you're welcome, brother. Life. If you talk about GRC, check out brother Michael. He's talking about check out Simply Cyber. He's got a GRC master course. He's super cheap. I think it's pay what you want. Chime in on that, brother Michael. I think you can pay what you want. Like I said, I'm a big fan of his, and I'm thinking about he's teaching you the basic, and I was going to set up a project. So once you get done with that project, you can add to your resume. He has it in his GRC where you finish a module. He tells you what to actually from that module on how to actually put that on your resume and link that up. My thing is to say, okay, here's a big project you done on top of that GRC class that you can say, you got real world experience, how to do policies and procedures, how to do purple team application security, how to do infrastructure security. That's coming up. We're going to hit Amazon and just look at their infrastructure and talk about GRC on top of that. And shout out to George. We're going to talk about sticking some EC2s in there. If you sprung up infrastructure as a service or a platform, how could you harden it with the STIGs? I'm a STIG guy. Most people do CIS. I'm an old school. Let's see. What my man said. If you have an adult conversation about risk, it pays very well. All facts, and I have those all the time. I just been lucky, and I've interviewed a couple of those guys, CISOs and CEOs, and talk about risk, right? Because people don't realize the higher you up, the less you talk about technology. A lot of times they say, PBO, how much is going to cost me? How long is it going to take to fix? And what's my risk if we don't do it, right? They don't give a shit if it's Linux, database. They just want to know risk, how much, how long, and what's the impact if we don't do it. Right? Like we talked about, will our ATO get taken away? If we don't do it, how much does our risk go up? Right? And 2 is when you're talking about risk, usually you're talking compensated control. If I can encrypt the database, right, can I encrypt the disk underneath that the database sits on, right, as a compensated control, right? So it's not as good, but my risk is not 100. It's not 0, but it shouldn't go up to, if you look at CVS, it shouldn't go up to a 10. If it's 1 and I just do disencryption, it should go to 3, right? So it's still in that acceptable risk range. And right, 2 is how much it's going to cost them, right? I could tell them to use Vometric, but that product is astronomical, right? So 2 is when you're in this game, you should have alternatives, things, you can recommend to your CEO and your CISO, All right, when you talk about cybersecurity and risk. Now let's talk about the C real quick. Compliance, monitor compliance with policy standards, security control. We did them, but do we comply with them, right? We did them, we hardened them in the middle, right? But did it meet IRS? Did it meet HIPAA? Did it meet FERPA, right? Because usually if you're doing GRC, you're complying with the large government agency, right? Automated technical controls, right? Artificial intelligence and machine learning. That's become popular. We're going to talk about AWS. They got a AWS config, right? And they can go out and look at your infrastructure to see how well you're complying with certain compliance. We're going to talk about that, right? Implementing manual and non-technical controls, continually self-assess, automate application security, vulnerability scans, right? One bill, if you look at there, I talked about DevSecOps. So when your program is checking code, right, it should be scanning for security tests and security vulnerabilities. Is it doing OWASP top 10? Is it checking for SQL injection, command injection, uh, um, uh, cross-site forgery, right? Cross-site scripting. There's 10 things when you checking in before you even get to production, right? DevSecOps, you should be scanning for those vulnerabilities so they never get in production, right? That's part of GRC, making sure DevOps as security doing what they're supposed to do, right? And that's how I feel, right? DevSecOps. So that's probably gonna be my next job, hopefully in 2024. Go to DevSecOps, right? Integrate security operations, source type stuff, establish standard operation procedure. We want to automate everything, establish a reporting tree. I was on the Blaine Trust, and we were talking about real quick in Ohio when that train derailed, right? Cybersecurity went into effect. You should have incident response, right? What chemicals are on that train? How do we put them out? If it's a chemical fire, electrical fire, whatever, it could be hot metal in there. Those are different ways from a fire protection. How do you put those out? And you actually have a hazardous waste manifest, right? So I used to work with the Department of Homeland Security. So we practice stuff. Okay, if this happens, who do we call, right? If this happens, you call the president, right? When that happens, CISO calls the president. He needs to get out of bed, right? Because Homeland Security was there and some other department was there. I think railways was there, right? But you practice that from, and we'll talk about that cybersecurity, right? What that's the incident response. That's a physical response. Security is there and compliance is there because once again, you got to know all the compliance, who to talk to, who to gonna call, and two part of that is you need to have cyber insurance for stuff like that for those physical events. All that comes under GRC. I've been working with our customers to figure out how to get cybersecurity and how to get it cheaper because they want to see how you harden your system before they insure you, right? If you're not doing no hardening, they're not going to insure your systems, right? So let's see. I do enjoy the RMF. I love the structure, everything. Yeah, RMF, and that's really a hidden gem. Most people, you talk technology, don't really understand the risk management framework. For me, it's a little easier because since I do IRS work and HIPAA work, they tell you what the RMF is up front, right, before you even start. They're going to tell you it's moderate and moderate impact, right, especially IRS. If somebody steals your social security number, it's hard, but nobody's going to die, right? So they go through and mark that. So, yeah, I've been doing RMF forever. It costs $25 plus tax. That looks great and helpful. I'll keep y'all posted. Cool. Yeah, I thought it was local. Shout to him. Appreciate your struggle security. Yeah, shout out to him and PBR was come through with that. Appreciate just letting the compliance roll. My clients, thank you. I'm learning as I always listen. Two is if you need some help, you can always reach out. We can chop it up. I was actually chopping it up with somebody. They were having a little few issues, but I'm always there if you want to chop it up. And that's one thing I'm actually thinking about. Let me know that might be something I do on my because you got those organizations that you can sign up for $5. I might just start doing compliance lessons again and actually running through full compliance scenarios. Everyone on the stream, shout out to them. Shout out to Struggle Security. He actually had me thinking that we're going to touch on that. He did physical security, right? And that's, I think, a hidden gem people forget from cybersecurity and governance, risk, and compliance. And shout out to my man, George. Struggle Security does not like Stigs. Shout out to Struggle Security. I finally caught one. Yeah, I can see you in the comments under Struggle. I don't see your regular one. I see you under Struggle. I cannot see you under your Gabe. I got to still figure out what's going on. Thanks for the barbecue fun. I appreciate that. Once again, check out this video. He was talking about physical security. And I think a lot of people miss that from a cybersecurity. Right. He definitely does more red teaming than me. But from a compliance standpoint, once again, I do IRS and this, and they always talk about, like he was talking about gates, bars. Before you go into cybersecurity, you got to have a badge. You got to sign in. We got to have webcams. Our servers have to be physically locked, right? So when they come in, they got to check the keys out, go to there and lock, right? A lot of people don't want to do all that, right? Because that's extra stuff. But when you deal with certain government agencies, those are the physical securities you got to do, right? Once again, I do a lot of IRS work, and the IRS says your data center has to be secure, locked, webcam. You got to sign in. Everybody has to be physically escorted. If you're not a FTE of this organization, you need to be escorted around, right? I've seen people walk that wasn't escorted. They actually got escorted out. Then the people that was supposed to be escorted gotten written up, and I seen a guy get fired, right? So people take that stuff seriously. So check out my man, Struggle Security. He was doing that physical security, and that had me thinking. And once again, from the Ohio State spill, that's a physical event. That's a commercial company. So when that happened, the CISO, right, needs to get with the president, because now they're going to have a government agency on their ass, right? So you got to make sure you got to manifest. Two is, and was that actually a domestic terror event? Was that an accident, or did somebody make that happen, right? All that's part of the investigation. And you need to be on top of that as a cybersecurity organization, because you could be called in front of Congress, right? So you need to make sure. And two is, you got to make sure you practice all that, even if it's just a tabletop, right? We call that break the glass, right? Once again, I did IRS work. So we said, if somebody stole our whole database, what do we do, right? So we had to call the IRS within 24 hours. We got to lock down the system. We got to, tear down all the VMs. We got to roll over the DR, but you need to practice that and know what's going to happen. Facts, you got to have a plan, right? So, and two is, that's part of cybersecurity, especially when you do this. You got to have a plan for each kind of incident, and they want you to run that plan at least every year, right? So we got to show what system we ran the plan over. What we try to do is, I appreciate you, Tech Xavier. So we try, I got to show support classes where it's at. No, shut up. Check out my man, I Always Joy. Congratulations on graduating. I think I saw that on a video. Let me know if I'm wrong. I was sharing his stuff before he got big. Shout out to him. But two is, that's part of governance, and I think a lot of people don't realize it. So we do a COOP. Where's your people going to go? Most people work from home now, so that's not a big deal. But if your data center goes down, are you going to do DR in the cloud? If Amazon East go over, you got to spin up to be able to go west, right? So sometimes whole geographic, even Amazon goes down every blue moon. Where can you spin up to, right? And these compliances, depending on what, once again, if it's HIPAA, FERPA, and this, they tell you what's the RTO, return operations, and RPO point in time. How many days of data can you lose on your database? Is it a day? Most people don't want to lose anything, right? So if you're doing that, what type of database do you need to have? How do you roll over? How do you roll over in 24 hours, 6 hours, 4 hours, or 15 minutes, right? Each time you go up and the smaller it gets, the higher it costs, right? Oh, yep. Shout out to my man. Welcome to the club. I just got a degree last week. Appreciate the early support. Means a lot. Yeah, I saw you grinding. So when I see people, I try to share their stuff. Even though my channel's little, I try to do what I can. You welcome, man. But once again, all of that is cybersecurity. So when you see stuff like Ohio from a cybersecurity perspective, how would you handle it? Right. So let's be realistic. I do mostly IRS, so we don't have trains rolling, but when we see an event happens, right, like a whole database gets stolen from a state, we walk through what will we do if that happens to us, right? How do we first hopefully block it? But if it happens, who do you call? How do you? Because the IRS says if you think something happened, you got 24 hours to let them know, or you're going to get a big fine, right? Once again, you need to know all those from a compliance standpoint to stay on top of that. Right, here's the various compliances that gets you the bag that you need to understand. Right, that's the California Consumer Act, CCPA, aka GDPR. Right, cybersecurity maturity, NIPSON, CJIS, criminal justice. That's usually state police coming from the FBI rolls up. Once again, GDPR, NIST is what most government agencies follow. High trust, HIPAA, DFARS if you moving guns and bullets, right? Graham Leach Bliley's financial, mostly banks, ISO, international. That's big overseas. Used to be big in US. I think NIST is overtaking that. FISMA, federal work, usually DOD, FERPA at the bottom, FedRAMP. That's for government clouds and CSPs. People got tired of reviewing each one, so the government gives AWS a stamp, Azure a stamp, and Google. Then you can run your government work in those clouds, right? So that's in those clouds have the proper security. FERPA's education, once again, HIPAA's health, right? So these are ones, and if you go to my homepage, I have a compliance playlist, and I probably have probably 60% of those. I got a FedRAMP, I got a FERPA, I got CJIS in there. I got NIST, I got FISMA. I need to do a CCPA. Those are usually privacy, right? So you got security and you have privacy. So you got to put those two together. But once again, when you're doing GRC, most of the times when you're doing GRC at that level, you're actually under one of these compliances. That's one reason you want to do it, right? Because you're under compliance and the government says you have to do GRC to comply with those to get that data, or for HIPAA to get that funding, right? So when people get those procedures and you need to get paid, if that's militarily or social security or whatever, you want that government payment, your system has to be approved to be able to get that money. ICAC, I got to look up that one. But once again, these are the things you're using complying with from a GRC perspective. So that's why you would do GRC, because you're reporting to one of these government agencies. And the reason you get the bag is you understand what you need to get your system, like we said, ATO, authority to operate, so you can get paid or data from these systems, right? So that's really what you're doing. We were talking about incident response, so I put that in there. And once again, talking about the government. So, and two is incident response team. You're collaborating and integrating and communicating with all these events. We talked about law enforcement agencies, once again, from the Ohio, right? Those are the government agencies you got to talk with. Incident response reporters. If you're big enough, once again, Ohio, when we have incidents, they tell people, do not talk to the media. We have a communication team. Do not get your ass fired by trying to be on the news. You better send them to the communication team, right? And we're going to jig down in this, the ISP, right? When you're dealing with AWS and Azure and Google, when your data is up there and they get hacked, your team's got to talk to Amazon's team, right? To figure out what the root cause is, right? Amazon's been hacked a few times. They will let their customer know what the issue is on that EC2, that container, right? But their team's got to communicate with your team, right? The other incident response teams, there we go, customers, constituents, and media, and software support vendors. The vendor, once again, we know Patch Tuesday, right? They got to let you know if there's an incident that caused their data. Kaseya's, right? That was a software product that got a lot of government agencies hacked. So they were dealing with their incident response teams, right? So that's the communication. So a lot of times when you think of cybersecurity, it's much broader than you think it is, right? It's more than just patching vulnerability scans. When you're talking about reporting to large government agencies, right, then your incident response teams has to communicate to, once again, constituents. I worked for a large state, so the citizens are constituents. So how does that work? From a Department of Revenue, from a health and hospital, from a state agency, right? How do you communicate if the state can lose their data? If you've seen that before, everybody gets credit and monitoring, right? So you got to send that information to the constituents from a GRC perspective. Kind of the same thing. Coordination team, incident response team, and other incident response, right? So this is your incident response team, and the coordinating team sometimes could be AWS's team, right? So your team has data in AWS, so you gotta coordinate with their team, right, to get back to here. Then sometimes the other incident response team is you have third-party vendors. So we have print vendors and vendors that printed out check for bulk of us. So if the data was up in AWS and it got hacked, right? So I've got to let the incident response team know, the CEO know, and the CISO know. Then if we sent that information to constituents or another vendor that caused them to get hacked, right? So you got to coordinate between multiple teams. I mean, I've actually seen that happen before. So you have 3 cybersecurity teams on the phone trying to figure out what is the root cause, right? Shout out to Struggle Security. You would call a big big consulting company out there, right? So there's large companies you would work with that would help you, right? Because a lot of times, and we're going to look at that coming up, is if you actually got attacked, right? A lot of times you don't have this expertise on site to actually figure out what ransomware is or malware is, right? So you can prepare and detect it. Then you're going to call a third party out to do containment and eradication and recover, right? And the post incident activity is to figure out what happened and make sure it doesn't happen again, right? But that's part of GRC. The GRC really is at the front end, right? So we tested it, we prepared for it, we did some tabletops, but a lot of times you don't have that expertise on staff. So you're going to actually have people on retainer. A lot of the big cybersecurity firms, they want retainers like lawyers because if something happens big nationwide, every state might be trying to reach out to the same vendor. So you got to put down a retainer. So they're going to help you first, right? And if you're a large state, you do not want to be waiting in line, right? So you have people identify. So that's what the GRC does, right? We're going to prepare it and we might actually detect it, but then we're going to call in a Mandiant. I'm trying to think. Mandiant is usually the biggest one, but what firm do you have identified? Sometimes you have local small firms to help you get started before you call in the big guns. Why? Local firm might be $150 an hour, 200. When you call in the big dogs, I've seen seniors and managers go for $500 an hour, right? So if you call in somehow $500, you better know you have a problem, right? So those are the things you got to practice with from GRC so you can understand. You prepare for how do you detect it? Are you using Rapid7? Are you using FireEye? Right? There's a Windows Defender, right? They got beacons and knowledge service, all that stuff. Facts. So yeah, shout out to him. So when you once again you get those practice managers, I've seen bill rates of $500, but when you call them, you better be right. And like I said, I've looked at stuff and I said, okay, I detect something that looks funny. That's really out of my lane, right? I don't have that expertise, but I know when something's beacon. I know when the IP address. Shout out to Struggle Security. When it's beacon China, I don't need to be very bright to know that don't look right? That IP is from Russia. That looks funny, right? I need to call the analysis people, right? I need to call the containment people, right? So, so that's it. And two is once again from GRC perspective, you need to test it, know who you're gonna call, when you're gonna call. Maybe have people on retainer, have a local organization to get started. And if it's bigger, calling the big guns, right? Charge them 100. Let them do a deeper analysis, then come call out Mandir, Price Whitehouse Cooper, one of the big dogs that's going to charge you. That's going to easily be a $20,000 hit when you call them, right? But once again, GRCs should have that setup practice, know who to call, when to call, and what's that gonna look like, right? Have that priced out, have insurance already set up. So that's part of GRC. This is AWS, so I just cut that in there. Most people know I'm on my AWS graph. AWS config is their compliance. It records and normalizes changes in a consistent format. Um, It manages resources and record configurations in a relationship. That's the part right there. It evaluates, checks resource and compliance, and manages. So AWS config has NIST 800 R4, NIST 853, revision 4 and 5. It has HIPAA, it has FERPA, it's TAR. So if you run AWS config, and we're going to look at a simple setup, it'll let you know if you're compliant or not. Right. So AWS artifacts. So artifacts is reports that says these services are HIPAA compliant. These services can be ran with NIST. So the GRC teams needs to validate everything the programmers are using to make sure that is valid to run that type of workload. That workload being HIPAA, NIST, IRS Pub 1075, y'all saw the compliance, FERPA, right? So you need to work with the development teams to make sure all those services are qualified to be ran with that workload. Um, this is a purple team, standard OWASP top tens. What you working with your development team to make sure none of these are in their programs, right? Now shout out to Struggle Security. I think he hit this on his too. Broken control, cryptographic failures. Injection has been around for 20 years. Security misconfiguration has been around one. Server side request forgery, logging and monitoring failures. Some of those are a little different, but half of these been around for 10 years, right? So part of cybersecurity is application security, purple team, right? How do you lock down your applications? Because besides social engineering, next is breaking into your website, defacing it or stealing data straight out of your website, right? So from a cybersecurity perspective, how do you lock down applications? And once again, cybersecurity is responsible for that. Good evening. Shout out to Juan Williams here to learn about the GRC. Happy to hear it. Check me out. Probably check out the replay, but GRC is a hidden gem. Check out my man, Simply Cyber. He has a $25 class. Brother Michael's taking it. He thinks it looks good, and I have respect for him. I've been on his platform twice. He's a PhD. I think he teaches at the Citadel. Simply Cyber. He has a very low cost GRC cybersecurity program. I'm thinking about doing a project on top of his where once you get his, and we can actually do a full project so you can actually use it as experience to put on your resume so you can break into the industry, right? So I'm just thinking about it. I say a lot of stuff. So that's all I'm gonna say. So this is a standard AWS configuration. It's super standard. Let me drop the link real quick if anybody wants to come up while we chatting it up. Oh, get to the right spot. Control. So this is a standard AWS setup from I dropped the link if anybody want to come up and just chit chat. So what is that? Standard 3 tier. You got your public subnet, your private subnet, then your database subnet. So up here, you could have a web server Apache, private subnet, Tomcat. I'm a Java guy. Files into your standard database. I'm an Oracle guy, which outdated, but been doing a lot of Postgres. So you would have your Apache, Tomcat, talking to your Postgres database, security groups. What ports are you letting in? What IPs are you letting in? Right. So that's standard. So how do we harden that from a GRC? We've been talking about NIST, HIPAA, FERPA. How do you make this setup quantify for that workload? Right. So that's how GRC makes this bad. So even though I'm setting this up in AWS, you need to make sure it can run a certain workload. Once again, HIPAA, everybody's familiar with health and hospital. FERPA's education. I do IRS Pub 1075, FISMA, DOD, but how do you harden that so you can run a specific workload? And that's one reason GRC gets a bag. Because if you don't configure that right and it gets scanned, you can come away with a big fine or you can stop them from doing work. So if you're trying to be HIPAA certified and you're not, you couldn't get payments from health and hospital for what doctors do, right? So that's one reason, once again, GRC gets the bag and try to put it in perspective, right? People just think policies and procedure, but from a technical standpoint, I got to run nested scans on it. I got to make sure whatever database we're using is encrypted in rest and in transit and in memory now, right? So just because the DBA says it's set up, right, I got to make sure those hardenings are set up right and check the box for compliance, right? But let's be super clear. You could be compliant and not secure, and you could be secure and not compliant, right? They're not, they could be mutually exclusive, right? So really you want to do both. You want to be compliant and secure, right? So you want to make sure. I think people miss that sometimes, right? There's some compliance checks. I'm thinking, okay, that's a box. It's not. Disk encryption to me is not. It's super low level security, right? Even though that's a big compliance check for me, right? I want file level and security, right? So if somebody gets on a database, and even though if they have read on a disk, if they don't have access to the file, they can't read it. Well, if I got disk encryption, the first thing people are going to hack on is um, permissions to read a disk, right? Because that's low level and everybody's access usually have access to read disk. So when people say I have disk encryption, I go, okay, that's not very secure. You want file level security, right? So let's see. That's all I had for today. Well, let me just talk in general. Um, Shout out to brother Michael. Simply Cyber has a great, I think, GRC introduction class. GRC is a hidden gem because you don't have to be super technical for parts of it, right? You need to understand it well enough. You need to understand the checks and the DBAs, the SME, the programmers, the SME, the Linux admins, the SME, right? My job is to make sure these checks needs to be on this Linux box. If you can't do these checks, what do we need to work together to do a compensating control? All right. And so that's kind of part of GRC. Yeah, because companies want to make the bag, secure the bag against the fines. Facts. You've seen big fines and people not doing what they're supposed to do. So yeah, so you one of the big reasons is fines, and two is reputational risk, right? Because a lot of times when especially small companies spin up, they're not thinking about security because you don't get paid for security, you get paid for features, right? So a lot of features they put in is not and are not secure, right? And us as GRC needs to make sure those databases, networking, all of that is secure and locked down and secure for you see it, the workload we're trying to run. Right? Yep, trade secrets. Boeing lost $100 million plane to China. Right? China stole their planes for their $100 million airplane. Why would they do that? They don't have to do R&D. So they went to the airplane show, and Boeing's like, that China plane looked like our plane because they stole their trade secrets and their plans to their plane, right? So nation states sometimes they're not stealing money, they're stealing intellectual property, right? So intellectual property, is a super. Google got half their search algorithm stolen when they were in China or Japan, right? So those things, certain things, I think people forget that cybersecurity doesn't do them. Just gonna touch on that. I might do a stream on that. Is how does cybersecurity play into the Ohio incident, right? And I'm calling it incident because that's what you call it from a cybersecurity perspective, right? Because that's a private company, so their chief information officer is in charge of physical security of the actual trains. Now, when the train wreck, right, it's a government agency. I think it was NTSB that's coming out, right? They're going to do the review, but you got to work with them. And if they don't like what you do and your paperwork and your testing and you didn't happen, the bigger your fine is going to be, right? So if you look, especially from HIPAA, I think there's 4 level fines. It comes from something minor to you were negligent and you didn't do what you're supposed to do. And I think HIPAA, I think it was $1,050 a record. So if you got 2 million records times $1,000, your company's broke. Right? So that's one reason cybersecurity gets paid, because HIPAA does it from you made a minor mistake. I think it was $30 a record to you're negligent. That's $1,000 a record, right? So you got $1,000 times 2 million records. I think that's $1 billion, right? So your company's broke, right? So that's why you need GRC. So even if you get hacked, once again, you don't want to seem negligent, and that's where the lawyers come in, right? These are the checks we did. These are the tabletop exercising we did. This is the testing. This is how we believe we were in compliance at the time. Here's our paperwork. Here's our system security plan. Here's our assessment, our vulnerability stand, our configuration management plan, our COOP plan, our business impact plan, right? DR plan, right? So that's why you have 3,000 pages of paperwork, so you won't be seen as negligent, right? So once again, just a touch in the GRC. I saw a couple people talking about GRC, so I thought I would chime in. I haven't went live in a while. I was kind of relaxing a little bit. January 2022 wasn't nice to me, so I'm making a comeback. So yeah, we're gonna just start touching on GRC again. Once again, that's kind of what I do now for my primary job. What I really want to do is marry GRC, like we talked about, with the cloud. So you got security, cloud with GRC. So hopefully that's going to be my next big bag, in the future. And I'm going to talk about that. Shout out to Keep It Techie. I don't know if Struggle Stream, we've been kind of talking about it. Everybody's doing courses, so everybody keep asking me. Shout out to Kev Tech. What's going to be my course? Once again, I probably do a course on top of Simply Cyber and his GRC class. Just kind of do a large project from a cloud perspective, and how would you do compliance in AWS, right, to get that AWS cloud bag. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about doing my class on. So that's all I got for tonight, fellas. I want to thank y'all for joining me. Shout out, I think it was Jam. He's not here. He was calling it late night with PBO. So I think that's gonna be my Tuesday, late night with PBO. So I want to thank y'all for joining me. I'm gonna hang around a little bit, see if y'all got any more questions. Once again, shout out to George. He was doing them stigs. That stig life. Yeah, if you're doing them stigs, man, you should have been making a little more money, especially 42. I might look that up while we talk. But yeah, once again, GRC. I know those guys easily, especially once you get 2 or 3 years under your belt, easily make 6 figures. Like I said, I think it's a hidden gem. Most people are not hip to RMF, risk management. Shout out to George, risk management, and the GRC. Once again, that's because you're reporting to one of these very large government agencies, and you need that type of oversight to give them the paperwork. Because usually they want you to do a uh, self assessment every year, and then every 3 years they're gonna come on site. Then they're gonna really scan your stuff to see where you at. And two is once you go through that a couple times, you have that under your belt, and once again, you put that on your resume, and that's going to add value because when you survive those those on-site visits, that's what everybody worry about. When the government on site, are you really going to pass? You can give yourself assessment a good grade, but when people come on site and actually start looking at your infrastructure, your hardening, network traffic, controlling your network, MFA, 2FA, right? All of that from a technical side. And once again, policy, procedures, incident response, training, awareness training from the management side, right? So I usually break those in half. That's all I got. PBO going to bed because he got to get up to work in the morning. I think I'm a little behind at work. I got to get my grind on. Check me out. This is going to be my standard time. Usually is Tuesday at 10. And I think I'm going to go back to Sunday at 3. I try to go live a couple times a week. Check out my man, Struggle Security, Kev Tech, Black Heights is always in the mix. Shout out to Tech G. I said keep it techy. There's a lot of great guys in this space, man. A lot of knowledge in this space, man. I'm old. I'm trying to get some new skills too, and I'm trying to drop a few gems that I know. Once again, check out GRC, risk management framework. You see it, those compliances, and how you would have to harden your infrastructure to pass those compliances. And usually big companies has those compliances. Once you master two, you can work for a very large consulting company, be it Mandiant, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Arthur Anderson, any of the big four. And if you Google that on Indeed, you'll see a ton of GRC. NIST is big. I live on NIST, so usually if I'm looking for something, NIST 800-53 to be exact, is the technical controls from a government system. Once again, PBO's out. Everybody has a great week. Let's go out there and get it. It's out here for us to get. Everybody have a great week. Let's get this hump day rolling tomorrow.